This is like, wow. It's like really exciting. First of all, thanks Ryan and Creative Mornings for this just incredible opportunity to be here today, and all of you who are spending your morning here. That's like really awesome and exciting. And also, I have a few friends who are here who I just have to thank like immensely, who helped me take some really seemingly disparate ideas and turn them into something that hopefully is cogent for you today. So you know who you are. Thank you. Also, I'm a kindergarten teacher, so I just have to like put it out there that I'm probably disproportionately excited to be talking to a room full of grown-ups this morning. So thank you for that, because that is like that's huge. And I also realize that this might be the moment where you are like, what's a kindergarten teacher here to talk to me about activism? And you're not alone in being confused about that. It's confusing. But I think really what I'm here to talk about this morning is a journey. And it's just not one journey, it's many of them. And they're sequential, and they're also simultaneous. They're linear and random, and they involve kindergartners as well as adults. But what connects them all is that they're profoundly motivated and influenced by the same force, which is curiosity. So several years ago, when my family relocated to Columbus, Ohio, I was hired at the Ohio School for the Deaf to teach language-delayed preschoolers. The school had a well-respected program with a very structured, clearly defined, and what I now understand to be pretty traditional curriculum. So it was theme-based, there were lots of crafts, kind of pre-academics, letters of the week, calendars, smart boards. Kind of a classroom like that. So I jumped right in and I did my best to get with the program. The problem was it wasn't working. For my students, really, for me, for anybody. We had weekly themes, and we'd spend a whole week learning about one topic, like penguins, and all week I would sign penguin, penguin, penguin. And then the next week our theme would change and we'd move on to bears, and I'd hold up a picture of a bear and all my kids would sign penguin. So, yay. I started to doubt myself, my teaching, my ability to work with kids, and finally one day as we struggled through another craft where I found myself cutting, guiding, gluing, and cajoling a group of wiggly and uninterested preschoolers into creating, or really not even creating, just constructing, something that had no interest and no meaning for them. I had just finally had enough. So I closed the classroom door, I packed up the activity that we were doing, and I found a box of scarves that I had in the classroom, and put it out on the table, pulled out a scarf, and signed to the kids, like, go ahead. And they just stared at me. They had no idea. They were very hesitant, but I also saw that they were something else. I think they were curious. Within moments, the energy in the classroom changed completely. A little boy who had never before spontaneously signed anything arranged a row of chairs into a train and took the scarves and was weaving it through the different chairs. He started to use a combination of gestures and signs and body language to engage his friends in imagination and creativity. And to say that this was eye-opening is a vast understatement. It was transformative. I also wish I could say that from that moment on, we never did another craft or used another calendar. But like everything big and life-altering, it really just marked the beginning of a process. And a process of letting go of what should be and starting to think about what could be. It's a process that meant meeting kids right where they were and finding ways to dream together. And a process that is ongoing and ever-evolving, but one that's led me to the school here in Indianapolis, where I now teach. So, raise your hand if you know a 5-year-old. Yes, okay. So all of you already know a curiosity expert, right? I can't think of anyone who knows more about curiosity than a 5-year-old. That's my 5-year-old. And here's a 1-minute snapshot from that 5-year-old who lives in my house. Do you like having curly hair? Did you always have curly hair? When did you get curly hair? Is that when you got black hair? How do you get rid of curly hair? Did grandma have curly hair? Did she have black hair just like you? Did her voice used to sound like your voice? Is this waterproof? Is this waterproof? What about this? this? Why are you just saying mm-hmm? Does that sound familiar? Yes? Okay. So there's a Yeats quote that's used a lot in educational settings, and he said, "Education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire." And after teaching in early childhood settings for so many years, I just have to totally disagree with that. Kids' fires are already lit. They are full of wonder, imagination, curiosity. They are intrepid explorers of the world around them, striving daily for the unknown, the unimagined, the not yet dreamed. As educators, our primary job is to make sure that we don't extinguish that fire, that we create spaces, opportunities, and environments that fan the flames, that encourage risk-taking, question-asking, role-playing. We live in a world where all of the facts, anything we need to know, is in our pockets, literally, right? We all carry on our phones. We don't need kids who are full of answers. We want to encourage our kids to be full of questions. We want to treasure, to protect, to nurture the curiosity that already comes so naturally to them. So needless to say, my classroom of today looks very different than when I first started teaching preschool. If you were to visit my kindergarten class, you would find kids doing magic shows, sliding down mud hills, searching for animal tracks, building spaceships, and wrestling. Hard to see, but they're wrestling. Very muddy. As my favorite expert on play once said, play is often talked about as if it were a relief from serious learning. But for children, play is serious learning. Play is really the work of childhood. This approach to children and to learning became all-encompassing for me. As I got deeper and deeper into it, it affected the way that I viewed parenting, relationships, teaching, and learning. I started coaching parents using this approach that centralizes truly seeing children for who they are and trying to understand what they need, approaching kids' behavior with curiosity, meeting them where they were, partnering to solve problems. I started giving talks to parents and teachers. And this felt really meaningful and important. I felt like I was helping, like I was doing something positive. And leading up to November 7th, 2016, when I did a personal assessment, how I existed in the world, what my general output was, I felt pretty confident. My job helped other people. I was politically engaged, very liberal. I voted every time. I pledged to NPR. I recycled. I believed that Black Lives Mattered. That person lives in my house too. On November 8th, 2016, my husband got in a little fender bender. We were told our furnace needed to be replaced, and I confidently said, well, bad things happen in threes, but at least we know the third won't be the election of Donald Trump. I, like many here, I'm guessing, woke up on November 9th shell-shocked. How could this have happened? What did I miss? And as I continued to ask myself this again and again over the next several days, I noticed something happening. White people who voted for Hillary, we were floored. We could not believe that we lived in a country that could elect someone who displayed such open bigotry, nativism, xenophobia, misogyny, and yet people of color did not seem quite as surprised. The collective message went something like, oh, you didn't realize that America was a racist, settler colonial nation, stolen from indigenous people, built on the backs of enslaved people? You didn't notice that before November 8th, Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, Eric Garner were all murdered, that babies in Flint, Michigan were drinking poisoned water, that the Dakota Access Pipeline was being built across holy lands, that Black and brown men are incarcerated at 5 times the rates of white men, that the FBI and Homeland Security have been registering and surveilling Muslims, that immigrants are being deported at levels never before seen. What was so surprising, so shocking, so appalling to me really just seemed like an obvious and natural next step to many people who had already been suffering under oppressive and racist systems since the founding of our nation. So it was around this time that I read, in its entirety, for the first time, Dr. King's 1963 letter from a Birmingham jail. I'm not going to read the whole letter today, though I definitely recommend it, but this quote really stood out for me. I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. A Negro's great stumbling block in his stride towards freedom is not the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate who prefers a negative peace, the absence of tension, to positive peace, the presence of justice. Shallow understanding of people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding of people of ill will. And so it was then, staring down the barrel of President-elect Trump, that I realized Dr. King might be talking about me. Because if I was really, really honest with myself, what was I actually doing on a day-to-day basis to affect change, to move towards racial equality, to seed liberation? Here I was, a teacher obsessed with the idea of curiosity, who considered myself a liberal, progressive defender of equality. And yet, where was I getting my information? Who was informing my worldview? What was the status of my own learning? Had I stopped at I Have a Dream? So I looked at my classroom, full of curiosity experts, and I realized that it was time to follow their lead. I started asking questions, and more importantly, I started listening to voices that were completely new to me, which meant articles, books, social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I started reading and following people of color, Leslie Mack, Linda Sarsour, The Root, Ijeoma Aloe, Robin DiAngelo, Roxane Gay. I started to learn about whiteness and white supremacy culture. And initially, this was incredibly uncomfortable. I read articles with headlines like these. I don't know if you can read that, but "To the white woman I can no longer be friends with. Whites only surge in the Caucasian invasion of racial justice spaces. 10 ways white liberals perpetuate racism. Pussy hats, the Confederate flag for white feminists. White feminism is a growing threat to black women in Trump's America. It's official. White allies are the worst white people in the world." And I didn't know what to think. Wasn't I a white feminist, a white ally? I felt embarrassed. I felt like I must be the exception. This couldn't be talking about me, #NotAllWhitePeople. I also felt like I wanted to stop, to go back to a time when I didn't know that these ideas existed, to a time before I had looked in the mirror. And yet one thing that kept me moving forward, honestly, was curiosity. As I continued to read and listen, I felt like I was learning a new language that described me to a T, which was really, really hard to take. White privilege, yep. White fragility, Tone policing, I think so. Defensiveness, definitely. And now to be clear, this is not meant to be self-reproach. I'm a huge believer in the words of Maya Angelou. I mean, pretty much all her words, but especially these. Do the best you can until you know better, and then when you know better, do better. I did not know better, and now I'm learning. One of the biggest things that I was hearing once I started becoming curious was a criticism of allies, and I must admit that I found this to be very confusing. I had spent my whole adult life thinking that I was supposed to be an ally, to help people, and suddenly what I'm hearing is that allies are not wanted, helpers are not needed. How could this be true? And yet, when I held up that mirror, when I confronted the white moderate in me, I realized that of course helpers are not needed. Because just being an ally, a helper, implies that I don't have a stake in this game, that this is not my story, my liberation. It means that I can opt in or opt out whenever I choose without consequence. And the truth is, if I'm actually going to do this work, actively confront white supremacy, both within myself and our society, then I need to be doing it not because of selflessness, but because of solidarity. Because it is a fight for my own liberation. And what I realized is that this is a fight for my liberation, because if my safety depends on your incarceration, then I'm not actually safe. And if my land ownership depends on your dispossession, then it's not actually my land. And if my freedom depends on your enslavement, then I am most definitely not free. It was time to stop seeing myself as an ally, but then what was next? Where could this go? I was brimming with ideas, questions, shame, inspiration, embarrassment, enthusiasm. I was like a recent religious convert, but I needed some focus. When my daughter was younger, yes, we can relate, right? She started asking a lot of questions about God, which, for a variety of reasons that I'm not going to get into right now, my husband and I had no good answers. But because I'm Jewish, her curiosity inspired me to start looking for Jewish community and Jewish institutions. What I found, though, was that no matter where I looked, Israel was front and center in every Jewish communal space. Around the same time that I was doing this looking, in 2014, Israel had begun a war on Gaza, a small strip of Palestinian land stuck between Israel, Egypt, and the Mediterranean Sea. I don't know if you can see that, but that's Gaza. During this war, over 500 Palestinian children were killed. So because of my child, I went searching for Judaism, but instead I could only find Israel, which was killing children. Up until this point, I had always been a little, or maybe more than a little, uncomfortable with the situation in Israel, but I would say that I fell pretty squarely into the something's not right, but it seems more complicated than I'm able to understand camp, which I now understand is a pretty large camp. With the brutality of the 2014 war, a war waged upon civilians, women, and children, and as a mother now myself, I realized that I could not ethically continue to claim ignorance. So, if you can see this, this is a map of Palestine at different dates, and green is land that belonged to Palestine over time, and then white is land that is claimed by Israel. So just in case there's anyone here who, like I was, is not super familiar with this issue, this might be one of the most controversial topics for an American Jewish person to explore. Here's some of what I learned. Jewish people began settling Palestine before World War II, but the Holocaust and the war sped up immigration. As a result of this and other efforts, the State of Israel was created and recognized by the UN and the US. In a war that began after Israel declared independence in 1948, 700,000 indigenous Palestinian men, women, and children were forced off of their land, out of their homes, and into refugee camps where many still reside today, 70 years later. This is called the Nakba, or the catastrophe in Arabic. And since 1967, the West Bank has been under continuous, brutal military occupation that profoundly impacts every day, every aspect of daily life, as was Gaza until 2005. Now all the borders of Gaza are sealed. Since the blockade began, there have been 2 major wars on Gaza, one in 2008 and 2009, and one in 2014. So that's Palestine today. So here I am, right? Part of one of the generations of Jews who was raised in the shadow of the Holocaust, where 6 million Jews, 5 million Roma, LGBTQ, disabled, communists, unionists, and others were murdered by the Nazis. And after these horrors, Jewish people around the world, my family, we made a promise that is etched into our beings where we said, never again. Never again will we allow the world to permit genocide. Never again will we allow the scapegoating of the most vulnerable. And never again will we miss the warning signs of approaching madness. But I believe that it must be clear that never again is not limited to Jews. It must mean never again for anyone. There's broad support for Israel and its policies in many mainstream American Jewish communities, but for me, because I am Jewish, because this is being done in my name with my tax dollars, I choose to work, or I'm commanded to work, for justice for all Palestinians. And so, with a much clearer understanding of this issue, I was driven to seek out organizations that were already doing this work, Jewish or otherwise. This is where we were going to find our community, our connection to Jewish values and traditions. And I found Jewish Voice for Peace and the American Friends Service Committee. These are 2 groups who are working relentlessly for justice in Palestine and Israel, 2 groups who at their core interpret the purpose of our faiths, Jewish or otherwise, to mean justice. Here in Indianapolis, these 2 groups have ties to every do-gooder racial justice organization in the city, organizations that center the voices of the most affected, the voices of people of color, of women of color, organizations that help me understand the deep connections between all kinds of different social justice and racial justice work. And so I started showing up, often with 2 kids in tow. I showed up for meetings, lectures, teach-ins, webinars, press conferences, rallies, planning sessions, fundraising discussions, one-on-one conversations, conferences, meetings. Did I mention meetings? By showing up and opening up for the easy things and for the more challenging, I started slowly, very, very slowly, to build relationships and trust. Curiosity allowed me to forge ahead through some very uncomfortable truths, to build relationships with those who have been doing this work day in and day out, much longer than I have. Oh, there they are. I love this slide. So these are some of the just incredible, beautiful, powerful people here in Indianapolis doing this work. We have Ayuya, which is Indiana Undocumented Youth Alliance, Tatiana Rebel, who's with AFSC and VOCAB, Kyra Harvey's with Indy 10 Black Lives Matter, Umayma Muhammad, who's with the Muslim Youth Collective and AFSC, Leah Humphrey, also with Indy 10 Black Lives Matter, and Don't Sleep, who does amazing racial justice work in our city. So these are people to know for sure. And what I learned is that these activists and organizers and community leaders survive, they thrive, not by focusing on all of the problems. The problems are there, don't worry. There is just no way to ignore them. But these leaders, my leaders, they also have a vision of a world that aligns with their values, and they painstakingly carry this vision into their homes and their communities. It's a vision of a world that they want for all of us. For it is as Black liberation theologian Niall Fort says, we need revolutionary visions and radical imaginations. For resistance, it tells us what we're fighting against, but imagination, it tells us what we're fighting for. So as I learned to listen to these leaders, these radical visionaries, to open myself up to new ideas, some that admittedly were very, very difficult to hear, little by little I began to find my own voice and to find my own vision. So yes, I'm a kindergarten teacher. But now I'm also becoming an activist. I accept that this is going to be uncomfortable and difficult, and I've started to let go of what should be and begun to dream a bit about what could be. So there I am, as a kindergarten teacher and an activist. Which brings me full circle to kindergarten. Because here's the thing about kindergartners. They are experts at play. But play is not exactly what we as adults think that it is. Have you ever really watched a child play? For the most part, they don't actually look like they're having fun. They're deep in concentration, right? In collaboration, in conflict. Their facial expressions are quite serious as they struggle through. Like Mr. Rogers explained, play is work. It's confusing and inspiring. It's tiring and stimulating. It's social and lonely. And every day in their playtime, there comes a moment when it seems like they're going to quit, that they've had enough, that they've reached a limit. And yet, almost without exception, curiosity draws them back in. It pushes them through hurt and conflict. It brings them back to the table even when they are mad, uncomfortable, defensive. It drives the deepest learning, and most importantly, I think, it allows them to imagine all of the possibilities, the could-bes instead of the should-bes. So when I think about curiosity more deeply, what is it? Just what is curiosity? Where does it come from? What sustains it? I mean, you know it when you see it, and especially know it when you feel it. But let's think about it for a moment. I think it's the suspicion that something good is waiting to be discovered. I think it's this nagging, gnawing hunch that if I keep searching, I will find. That's why kids are so intense at play. That's why their teacher, someone like me, would keep plodding forward through really difficult ideas and scary territory. It's curiosity. curiosity is not just for kittens, right? It's not some silly, wide-eyed naivety that carries you skipping through the lilacs. It's the real, universal human drive to just find shit out, to look into something that doesn't quite make sense and say, I'm going in. I think there's something novel or beautiful or useful in there, and I want to find out. And so I say, in this struggle for justice, in this work, and for the liberation of our neighbors and ourselves, let's be like kindergartners. Let's let our imagination guide our fight. Let's rekindle our curiosity, and let's get to work. Thank you.
All right. Give it up for Malkah. And we have a few moments for some Q&A for sure. So please show as much respect as her kindergarten class does, and orderly raise your hands if you have some questions. And we got a little bit of time for some Q&A if you want to stick around. So probably just, what do we got? Maybe 10 minutes or so. So, yep.
Great. Yeah, in the front row.
Can you talk a little about what taking care of yourself looks like?
Yeah, that's such a great question, because I think, like I said, I mean, for me, defensiveness was probably the biggest stumbling block to some of this. And when you really dive into this, you hear some really hard things. And I mean, especially as a Jewish person in Palestinian liberation work. And I think that instinct to be defensive and to back away is very, very strong. And to decide to just push through it takes a very conscious decision. But there's a leader in one of these justice groups who said like the smartest thing. And she said, look, if we're criticizing you, it means we want you to be better, right? It means we want you in this work, that you matter, that you count, that you're valuable to this work. And so if we didn't think that, we wouldn't bother criticizing you. You know, we'd walk away. We would just kind of write you off. But if we're helping you, we're giving you this feedback, and I have gotten feedback, let me tell you. And that just, I mean, defensiveness is physical, right? Like, you know this, you feel it actually physically inside your body. There have been nights when I've laid in bed after somebody has called me out on something, and I just thought, oh my God, I can never show my face again, you know? And then getting up the next day and showing your face and remembering, they're helping me be better, right? Like, they're calling me in, not pushing me out. And so just that has been really helpful to me. I think also remembering, like, there's something much bigger here that we're doing, and that it matters for my kids, the world that I want for them. And so the little bit of embarrassment, or like, I mean, I'm a kindergarten teacher and a mother, so I basically walk around embarrassed like all the time. Like, it's just like embarrassing to be me. So like that part, you just kind of have to own it. Like, yeah, I mean, there's just no value in being jaded in this. I think like the more we're just open to new ideas and okay to hear things that feel different, like, and know that it's cool to be embarrassed sometimes, it's fine, and that you're gonna survive it, and the next day you'll go on and you'll stay in the work and you'll do what you need to do. I think that for me, that's the self-care that has pushed me through. Thanks. Yeah. Thank you. That's a great question. I think I go back and forth between the two sort of probably polar ideas that when push comes to shove and we really are honest, the only people we have real control over is ourselves, right? Like, you can't actually control somebody else, and whether that's a child or a colleague and so remembering that idea that like if I just keep making ethical choices and being living true to what I believe is a value, then I can just like confidently go to bed and wake up every night that I've done that. And at the same time, like I think just conversations amongst people and listening and realizing that organizing work is figuring out exactly where someone is, because we all come to this from somewhere and we come to this from a different place. And so as many times as I remember to just like hear someone's story and try to hear their story without judgment, like remembering that I started somewhere and I'm only somewhere and I have a lot more wheres to go, and that everyone who I come across is somewhere on this journey, and that if they're bothering to engage with me about this, it means there's something in them, some curiosity. And so just hearing their story as much as I can and figuring out, okay, like, yeah, that's something we do really connect about. Let's explore this idea more, and doing that without judgment, I think has been a tool that's worked for me. Thanks. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, that's a great question. I think the first thing I would say is for social media users to try to decolonize your social media intake, right? And that means like going on and seeing who you're getting information from, like who's in your Twitter feed, what voices are showing up on your Facebook and your Instagram. There's a whole world called Black Twitter. It's absolutely amazing. And just going in there and finding people to follow, and you'll quickly realize that like the more you expose yourself and hear these ideas, the less like of a gut punch it is every time you hear it. It just starts to feel more normalized, and then you start to be able to move past that like discomfort for yourself and realize, okay, what's the message? What's the underlying message here? So I would say start there, like figure out people to follow and to see and see someone else's worldview. I also think it's really important to find out what matters to you, because there's a lot, obviously, out there. We know that. And you can get really overwhelmed really quickly. Like, okay, should I be caring about like water protectors, or is it like hunger and food deserts, or is it Israel and Palestine, or you can go every direction. So I think really kind of honing in and say like, what gets me up in the morning, like what change do I need to see to make me feel like I'm actively working towards the world that I can dream of, and then finding out who's doing that work locally, because this work's already happening, right? Anything that you can think of, you do not need to go home and like invent the app for it, or like reinvent any wheel or whatever. Like people have done this work, they're doing it, and they need money, and they need bodies, and they need people to show up for their stuff, and they need people to show up for the boring stuff, right? Like, yeah, we come out for the Women's March, it's amazing, but also like we have to show up for like chalking in front of the city commissioner's office. We have to show up for city county council meetings. We have to show up every time someone tries to close down a food grocery store and put in a brewery instead. Like these are the things that we have to be going to. We can't just go to the kind of the big photo op ones. We have to go to little things too, and listen to the voices of the people speaking there. And I would say the third thing, or maybe the fourth, is to, sorry, spend like the first part just listening, like it's so tempting to show up and be like, hey, I have this great idea and you should do this and do that. And that's not how you build trust, right? Like the way we build trust is showing up again and again and again and staying quiet, like sitting in the back and hearing what other people's voices are, and just showing like, I'm here and I'm here to learn, and I'm not bringing anything to the table that you don't already have, that you haven't already thought of. Like I'm just kind of here to figure out what else I can contribute to this conversation, but certainly not off the bat, because if you've probably already thought of this idea, and I'm just kind of here to be a supporter. I hope that answers that. Sorry. I think I'm getting the wrap it up signal.
That's like a perfect one to stop on, though.
Okay.
So yes,
okay.
Yes, that was awesome. The 4 points.
The
to
4
get in
points.
the
I'm
12.
sorry.
Yes. No, it's perfect. Guys, give it up for Malkah one more time, please. Thank you. And thanks to the Needhammer for having us today. And I expect to see all your faces next month. Thank you.